I got super interested in this idea of economic democracy as a youth worker, um, thinking about what are some alternatives to capitalism that we can really explore and implement, and have been having a lot of fun kind of exploring the ideas in school. And I started working with an organization called the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative, and their organization in the Bronx is trying to pull together a curriculum for popular education around economic democracy and galvanize their base to kind of create worker cooperatives and push for different policies that increase access to capital, democratize access to capital. And so, I
Sorry, I want to talk to a couple of people.
I was just doing an intro. My name's Nana. Margo, nice to meet you. So this is one of their workshops. They want me to kind of pilot them. So some of these activities are pulled together from different organizations. Some of the frameworks are frameworks they came up with. And so what would really be helpful is like really thinking through them and see if they're useful, if they really kind of get at the concepts that are helpful to building this movement. So the first thing we're going to do is introductions, and for everyone to grab a sticky note. And what I would love to do is for you to say your name and any other information that you want to offer, and then say say something that you absolutely couldn't, you feel like you absolutely couldn't live without. Um, and it can really be anything, but just your name and any, what you do or what you like or what you're interested in, and then something that you absolutely could not live without. Anybody want to start? You want to know?
Well, I'm Johnny Hankins. I'm in the US because my wife's at Harvard for 3 years. I work for a non-profit in Italy. I'm a blogger, really. Write about responsible innovation and ethics within innovation. Innovation including, all of this kind of political and social innovation, not just science. And I could not live without my bike.
Pass it to your left or to your right?
Yeah. I'll pass it to you.
Okay. I'm Jeanette. I work here at the Youth Center. I mean, I can only think of food.
Excellent. Oh, write your answers down. Sorry.
My name is Margo. By profession, I'm a chiropractor, and that is sort of an incomplete definition because I do really cutting edge, kind of creative, neurological based and sometimes nutritional based healthcare, and I have been struggling over the past few years to figure out how to take the work I do and bring it into a community setting so that it can serve people who really, really need that care, and not to get stuck in like a boutique kind of thing. And I thought I knew where I was going, and I've hit a couple of different walls. So I'm really wanting to figure out. I mean, the economics of it are totally brutal because the people who need the most care are the people who have the least resources to give it, to pay for it, and the institutional issues are anyway. It's a long story, but so I'm trying to figure that out, and I'm needing to think outside the boxes. I've already been thinking outside the box, but I need to go even further. So, and I think the thing I can't live without is availability of open space.
Oh. My name is Nana. Something I could not live without, my my brothers.
My name is Stacy. I do work with cooperative businesses at the Boston Center for Community Ownership. I'm teaching Co-op Academy this semester, and what I can't live without is music. I think, even to the point where I told my family if I ever end up in the hospital on life support, please make sure that my iPod is handy, and please make sure.
Not if you ever end up dead. You're not
Yeah,
going that far.
please put my iPod in the closet with me, just in case.
Well, I'm Nifa. Good morning. With the Co-op Fund of New England, and I would say family, and how I define that changes over time. But family.
Cool. I'm Jordan. I am a student. I'm a master's student at Clark, and I study environmental policy and different types of knowledge. And I think that the thing that I couldn't live without is like storytelling, like whether it's books or music or some just sharing stories. I love it more than anything in the whole world.
My name is Noah Cohen. I'm also coming from Boston. I work in a library, but I've been involved over the years in a lot of different kinds of activist kind of organizing initiatives, and I feel more and more like we need to build some kind of long-term infrastructure and not such short-term kinds of things. And what I can't live without is also like family and friends.
So those are all really good answers. And I'm going to transition us to this iceberg here. I don't know how many of you guys have seen this iceberg before. No, great. So what no one did say that they could have lived without was like a job or money or the economy. Or their iPhone. Or the iPhone, yeah. I almost said my phone, but but if you like listen to like the news or like popular discourse on kind of like what's really important, a lot of it is centered around the economy and like what's going on with the economy and our GDP. And so this iceberg, which is put out by the Community Economics Collective, is supposed to kind of represent the idea that if you think of the economy in terms of like labor and wages and jobs, like that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Everything that you guys said, and if you guys want to put your stickies up here, are below the iceberg. And so if we could do a couple of, if you guys could also, before you put them up, brainstorm other things that are really important to kind of like how we sustain our lives or how we live that are not considered when you think of kind of like this tip of the iceberg economy. And then we'll put them up in the front yard.
Are we writing or speaking?
We're writing.
I've filled mine up already.
Here you go.
Oh, thank you.
I had given people 2 each, and then I think I split. Actually, that's just split them. Sorry.
Cheers.
And as you're done, you can put them up. some really great ideas, and they're great because they're all true. The things that we need are things like music, relationships, trees, vegetables, heat, family and friends, emotional space, children, art, history, housing, knowledge. And so the argument here is that, like, if you just focus on like what's on the tip of the iceberg, you're not really thinking about how does the activity up here really relate to the activity on the bottom. And that's kind of what's wrong with the economy, the way it's traditionally thought of, right? Like, people make wages, but the idea isn't to really connect like how their wages are impacting how they're able to do any of the activities here, because that's why we do it. The reason why we work is because we want to shelter ourselves or take care of our family or like play music or do all the things that are really important to us, and the job is not what's important. And so I wanted to start us off with kind of like an understanding of the idea of the economy should encompass more than just work and kind of the financial system that we traditionally talk about. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's not traditional at all. I think it's, the reason I'm here is because I've been trying to get my mind around this for a long time, and I'm looking for some clarification and insight, but I think it isn't traditional. I think that, that traditional societies organized what they did and what kind of return they got from the work they did based on what was needed. And so somehow in the last few hundred years, this idea of the economy with a life of its own, where just somehow emerged. And it's a total construct, but we're all stuck in it. So, but I don't think it's traditional. I think it's this kind of anomaly that past things contributed to, but somehow it's taken over and it's killing us.
Just to add to that, I don't feel like it's just taken over out of nowhere. I feel like it's definitely spread itself through colonialism, and we're kind of at the center of that colonialism here. So any model of getting out of it isn't just going to come out of voluntarism. It's going to have to come out of some kind of deliberate resistance to an investment in maintaining that economy, because it allows for people's, labor and lives and land to be exploited, and for power and money to be concentrated somewhere at the top of the pyramid.
Does your model, it always has seemed to me that the imperative of the economy growing is a big part of the engine, and I agree with you that there's the repressive nature of it, but I don't understand how those two things are connected. And where does that fit in your idea, in your model?
Which do you mean?
The imperative for growth is somehow linked in to the oppressive nature of it, but I don't know how to connect those two dots.
Well, do you want me to answer that, or do you want to?
Well, I'm raising that question.
I have thoughts about it, but I don't want
your workshop, so.
No, I was just trying to grasp the question myself to see if I could tie it in, or if it was something that, let's continue with the workshop and let's see like what else emerges. Yeah. So, any final thoughts on this activity and the idea?
Well, there's a saying that I'm not going to get correct, but that's something to the point of, like, you end up succeeding at the things that you measure. And so when I don't know that we're succeeding at creating jobs, but when we look at the economy in a conventional manner, then we look at GDP and we see, okay, GDP is growing, Wall Street indexes are growing, and yet our communities are suffering. And so by trying to find metrics to measure that capture the stuff below the water on the iceberg, maybe we'll start to succeed at it.
Well, that's going to be problematic then, because the government and the entire social system is going to fall apart. If you start measuring people's quality of lives in the US, people don't have good quality of lives in the US. You know, regardless of how rich a state it purports to be, quality of life is
Right.
poor.
Right.
And so if you start measuring these things, then it's going to implode.
What do you mean by implode?
Well, you have to maintain the population in the belief that what's going on is right. Okay? And if you start telling the population that they're becoming poorer and that society's falling to bits, and 1/3 of 1% is getting richer and everyone else is getting poorer, then sooner or later something's going to happen.
You think that might light a fire?
It might light a
Yeah,
fire,
that
but you would imagine that it would have already lit a fire.
Yeah.
You know, there's something that is avoiding the fire, that is putting the fire out.
But making that information more widely
I think
understood,
the Occupy
I think
movement
it's
did
like
try to do that actually.
It did try and do it, yeah.
So let me introduce this. Yeah, no, that was great. This framework for kind of trying to understand this conversation. What this says is that there are ruling institutions that maintain. Oh, before we go on, I wanted to give Jessica a chance to introduce herself. I'm sorry, I skipped you.
No. Hi everyone, I'm Jessica. I'm a Clark student, graduated this past May, but like Worcester, so I'm sticking around for a bit.
Yeah.
And you're with Future Focus Media?
No, I'm just helping out.
Okay. So yeah, there are institutions that control the money and the resources, and they're like corporations and oil companies and finance companies. And then there's like the rest of us, like families and individuals and small businesses and neighborhood associations. And then in between those two are mediating institutions, like government, courts, press, labor unions. And like the real battle right now is like for control over these mediating institutions. Like the ruling institutions exert control over the mediating institutions, and that filters down to us, and we try to organize to exert control over these mediating institutions to like control like these ruling institutions, right? So this is kind of like where we're at now. What are your guys' thoughts? Yeah.
I have a question. Why wouldn't we say also that government agencies are part of ruling institutions?
Yeah, I mean, you could think of it like that, but I think this is just trying to say that who actually controls resources are the ruling institutions, and kind of like how that gets distributed to the rest of the population is through like the mediating institutions.
The way it's written there makes it seem as if we have this struggle going on inside of those mediating institutions, where there's sort of this kind of war position going on, where we're trying to gain a foothold, and the other side is, which is the capitalist institutions are sort of, but I don't think we have that situation right now. Like, I think we have the situation where government is pretty much controlled and owned by the ruling institutions. The police are controlled and owned by the ruling institutions. The military is controlled and owned by the courts are controlled and owned. And even to a large extent, I would say, like, if I look at my labor union, they're owned by management. They're not representing the workers. They're trying to make sure that we don't organize in ways that are effective. So I don't feel like we've got that struggle going on inside the supposed mediating institutions where civil society is fighting for position. I feel like we have to acknowledge that they took over those institutions a long time ago.
So do you think that that's like misrepresented in the like categorization of it, or because I think I think that it's I think that it maybe that relationship is a function of like the strength of the arrows, and not the upward moving arrows are just actually very weak in like our current situation.
I mean, you could argue that like the state of labor unions now is not the state of it in the 40s and 50s, and that at one point they like exerted more, they mediated better for civil society than they do now.
I feel like that was, I mean, I know that I'm very familiar with that as a left model. Like it's been around for a while, and a lot of people justify a lot of what they're doing. Like they're engaged in this war of position in the mediating institutions, and that's what we're trying to do as organizers. We're trying to get our foothold in there so we can hold those things down. But I feel more and more sympathetic with folks who are coming outside of that model, who criticize it. Like a lot of indigenous communities have said, those are all the ruling institutions as far as we're concerned, and we have completely different ways of existing which don't involve those institutions. And I've seen that like right directly, like I've lived in communities where they didn't have police and they didn't need them. And folks who said that they were part of a progressive movement were trying to create a police force to represent the people, and they rejected it because they knew that it would take the power away from them and their ability to actually deal with their problems without police. So that's I guess where I'm coming from.
Those are great insights. Any other insights or reactions to the model? Yeah.
I don't. Well, I actually haven't seen this before, and I'm surprised if other people are familiar with it. That I don't know how to out. But I actually, it helps me actually understand a lot of the organizations that make up our ecosystem of activists and power building institutions, and like it helps me understand like where they're targeting and how they see those institutions. And I think you have a lot of good points. Like I'm both like, in 1 minute I'm like really excited about this, and also like, oh yeah, but then ready to deconstruct it already, even though I just learned about it. So I think it's still really useful to know about this, but immediately critique it as well, just like any framework.
Yeah. Other thoughts? You're gonna like hopefully you'll like the economic democracy framework, but also have like some thoughts of how the framework could improve as well. Because I mean I think that the entire problem is that if these mediating institutions were like doing their jobs, like we'd be less dissatisfied with capitalism, presumably.
Well, that's not necessarily even a good thing.
You're right. Say more.
Well, we should be dissatisfied with it, maybe. Maybe they're just there to scam us into not doing anything.
I would argue that
Yeah,
that's
so,
true.
so who are they mediating? Are they mediating the power?
They're not
Are they
mediating, they're
mediating us?
brainwashing.
Yeah. And I think that's Noah's point, that they're not mediating, they're actually just tools of the ruling institutions.
Just one other point about going back to the first one.
Yeah.
That one of the things that happens as you get more of an environmental destruction and pressure on physical resources is that the tip of the iceberg there reaches down into the other stuff and monetizes it.
Mm-hmm.
So like, and I call it mining our souls. So it's like that you get things that are called products that are not in any way products. You get people being, like all these multi-level marketing things, right? You're supposed to use your family and friends and basically use them to exploit those relationships for your personal profit. And the biggest, one of the biggest casualties to that is trust. Because the things that are built on trust then become subject to this transactional, exploitative model.
Yeah, so I had an activity planned here, but there's actually not quite enough people for it to work well. We just try it. Let's try it. Let's go with 3 volunteers.
I'll volunteer, whatever it is.
Yes. Perfect. Come on up. Let's see. Do you have any math geniuses in here? Well, Stacey's genius. Oh, you're good. Excellent.
Arithmetic genius.
Not mine.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, let's line up here. And so, we live in this world, this doggy dog world, as Tommy Pickles would say, the doggy dog world. And you guys are workers, and you're, you know, you don't have to be workers. I have a contract for you. I'm the CEO of the Capitalist Corporation of America, generic. You know, all these folks are unemployed, so if you don't want to work here, you don't have to sign a contract. Someone will replace you. Don't worry. So here's your contract. If someone could read that out loud for everyone's benefit. Anyone?
I agree to work full-time for Capitalist Corporation of America for the wage of $8 per hour.
Yeah, can we get some signatures there?
No.
Okay. You're now unemployed. Someone else? Someone else? I do need a volunteer for the activity. I understand that. I understand that, like, we want to revolt against this already. Yeah,
Would it be bad to actually sign your name?
You don't have to. Yeah, sign. Yes, sign, and then you will get your worker badge. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So the workers' pay chart. Each worker works for $8 an hour. Each worker works 8 hours a day. So each worker takes home $64 a day.
So that's $320 a week.
Thank you. Wow. So this is a hamburger joint at the Capitalist Corporation of America, and so each worker produces 50 hamburgers in an hour. So each worker produces 400 hamburgers a day, and each hamburger is sold on the market for $2.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, end of day one, and you guys have made how much money?
64.
That's a great point you have. Thank you for remembering that. What I actually meant is, how much value have you produced for the company?
$736.
What?
What do you?
800.
So $800
on a gross
minus
basis.
the pay.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go at 800.
Right, 700.
But
It's not
the
800
materials
though.
cost something.
Yeah, no, we're
But
gonna
this
get
is
there.
still
We're gonna
gross.
get there.
Okay, so
We're
still
gonna get
everything's
there.
still gross.
And then the
Okay.
net.
Oh, I have to. So, you know, you sold all of your burgers, you sold all of your burgers, and you sold all of your burgers, right?
So if you pocket this split,
But like Mika said, actually, how much you guys made was $64. So, thank you. I'm rich. Thank you. Excellent. Congratulations. Then you're right. There are some overhead. It's I think it's $80 a day, something like that. And so gonna pay that out, and the rest is thanks. So what just happened here?
Well, they made you rich.
What?
They made you rich.
You profited from their labor.
Yeah. Surplus went to me because I'm a capitalist, and you know, maybe there's some argument that, like, you know, I had some upfront costs, so this is like paying me back. But in the long run, like, I, you know, just am pocketing all of the surplus from you guys' amazing work. Thank goodness you signed those contracts that locked in how much you were going to get back from this. So what could they do if, like, they don't like this setup?
You can come and sit with me.
Out in unemployment,
Yeah.
where you're not getting the access to medicine because you don't have a job.
No,
No.
you don't have any health insurance.
You know, what else do they do?
They could make their own burgers at home and give people like the
Okay.
We can try to raise our wages to $10 or $12 an hour.
Mm-hmm. How could you do that?
Organize a union.
No, you get the sack.
Really?
Ask for a raise.
Or you could, well, it depends on how many people you have. If you can organize enough people to support you, you could seize control of the, you know, take the business and say, no, we're not giving it back, and we're
By
going to
force.
produce.
We can make
Right.
hamburgers out of.
Yeah, the police would come round.
Yes, they would. It just depends on how many people you got.
Sorry, what were you saying?
Outsiders organize a boycott.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah. To force me, the owner, to pay you guys better.
Get some bad publicity. Bad publicity is always good for the workers.
Yep.
Lose their jobs.
We could go out and organize the unemployed to create a cooperative hamburger joint, selling hamburgers for $1.50 an hour and accepting a lower margin on our investment.
Perfect.
Oh man.
Putting you out of business.
That would totally put me
Right
out of
next door.
business.
Right next door.
So great, thank you guys. Yeah.
So I get to keep my $64.
Yeah, you can keep your $64. You can also keep the contracts that you signed. I will enforce those. But what you guys start to get at, and even before it was kind of circular. You know, some of the ideas were like, we can ask for a raise, we can, you know, form a union to demand better wages. But those don't kind of disrupt the relationship between me as I'm still the owner, and I still can like make the decision of like, sure, like let me give you like an extra $1 an hour or not. But you know, the relationship is still there, that I am the owner and you're workers, and I can exploit your labor because like that's the way the system is set up. So the idea of economic democracy, I'm going to use that now, is that there are no ruling institutions, right? Civil society controls the money and the resources and creates mediating institutions to help manage that process. So in the arenas of like work or home and land, financing and government, you have people controlling resources democratically and collectively, and managing how they are distributed in a society. And like that's the fundamental difference between kind of like what's happening now and like what we could move to in terms of economic democracy. Thoughts?
Well, you've got to do it completely detached from the capitalist economy.
Say more.
Well, you can't embark upon something like this because there's far too much external pressure to stop you doing it. From access to money and everything else.
But people are doing it, right? Like people are forming worker cooperatives. People are forming community land trusts.
Yes, on a small scale.
Right.
Yes, you can do it as a small group, but if you want to get rid of the ruling institutions in the country, you've got to start with a completely separated society. It can be small, and it would expand, but you can't involve anything from the outside.
What do other people think?
Doesn't sound practical.
No, I'm not saying it is practical.
So what is it? I'm not really interested in breaking from all of my friends and family who are still embedded in the capitalist economy. I want to bring them with me.
No, I'm talking about when you're creating the structure.
Uh-huh.
I'm not talking about you actually having to do anything physically. But
So you're saying that in order for example, to experience like worker cooperative, worker ownership, employee ownership on a large scale, you would have to what?
Well, what are you going to do with your worker, employee, large scale, whatever it is you produce? Are you just going to produce food and try and have a stable economy that is completely self-sufficient outside the capitalist economy, or are you going to produce something that feeds back into the capitalist economy?
I think that yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to try to reframe what he was saying.
Okay.
Which is that the worker co-ops that we're starting up, for the most part, are functioning within capitalism. It's a little island of economic democracy on a small scale functioning within a larger scale capitalist system, which I think is just the reality. I mean, there are like intentional communities who are doing the isolation thing. But yeah, I don't have a response. Just wanted to make sure that.
So, if I understand it correctly, you're talking about sort of, this is the society that would be an alternative to that other society, and it would be one where we sort of collectively control the resources, and we determine the work that we do and the value of the work that we do and why we do it, and all this is a collective kind of thing, so we're creating completely alternative institutions. The biggest problem that I see is not how such a model can work, but how we get there from here. So
and I think that's the point. That
yeah, and that well, I mean, maybe that is just getting back to, that's an issue. I think that some people are arguing that one model of getting there from here is that we start within capitalism, building these little cooperatives, and we make that into a movement that tries to grow and replicate itself, and people see that this is an alternative, and we build them. But the problem is that all of those little cooperatives are already functioning in that competitive economy, where some people have much more privilege and access to building them, and some people have much less. And that's one issue, and the other issue that I feel like comes up a lot is this word democracy, which we're trying to evaluate democracy as this good thing, but there maybe needs to be really a fundamental critique of democracy already, because democracy has always been built on a certain kind of centralized governance that involves ruling institutions, and always has involved ruling institutions.
Yeah.
And even the attempts to break it from in a really radical way, so long as you had a centrist state model, they still tended to replicate hierarchies of power. So I guess that's the anarchist critique of economic democracy, is that you're still building on that idea of a centralized governance.
So the idea of economic democracy is, I think, does try to break from the idea of centralized governance. At least the way that I've heard it explained. That it's a critique of both kind of like our system, capitalist system now, but also kind of like communism and socialism, in that they just, the power is still centralized, and you're not still kind of giving people diffusely power to decide what to do with resources. And so I think it tries to reclaim this idea of democracy, or I don't know if you can say reclaim if it never actually existed the way it did. It should have in theory. Yeah. But it tries to kind of assert the idea that democracy is about individuals having control, having a say in what is happening in their lives, and how you collect individual opinions and deliberate about them and come to a collective decision is like kind of the work, what we need to figure out how to do. And I think that because the way that we do democracy now is like kind of like this like fake show where it's like, yeah, we vote, but like really we don't have control, like as this like this diagram kind of shows.
I like this as a potential breakdown of the first one, but I kind of want to see different stuff in the circles, like the different realms here of work, home and land, finance and government. Since the first exercise we did, I kind of want to see those things in there, like when we, like housing was one of the things that came up there. So the capitalist, how do we do housing under capitalism? We have to buy houses, we have to rent houses, we have to rely on developers and investors to create new buildings and.
No, we don't have to do that. We could all build a house between us.
I understand, but I'm saying that's how it's happening now.
Yeah.
So, you know, what I'm interested in the second diagram is like, I guess you do have it up there, home and land, but like housing would be one for me. Like, how do we do housing when we think of it in terms of like the provision of the thing that we actually need is the central question there. Not, I feel like it makes me kind of sad inside when we talk about creating jobs even, because it's like, I understand the reality of why we're trying to create jobs right now, but I always feel like I'm not trying to create jobs, I'm trying to get us taken care of with the minimum amount of labor spread as widely as possible. Like, that's what I'd really like instead of jobs. I'd like all of us to be working part-time, you know? So it's like, how do we do housing outside of the capitalist economy in a way that makes more sense for us? And how do we do all of those things? How do we, you know, and why are we doing anything that's not on that iceberg, you know?
Yeah, I think that all of these tools kind of that we are coming up with to fill in these circles are things that we've created to circumvent this power structure. But they still exist in a society that's dominated by the power structure. And so maybe, you know, if like we're going to make this like very true break from, you know, the ruling institution, then maybe some of these are in fact just kind of transition periods that we're in, and that, you know, they're competitive. They work in this competitive economy, as we've said. And so maybe there's something to be created, some kind of innovation that needs to take place that transforms even these kind of organizations. Because we do need to, I think, address the basis of the iceberg without the valuation and like monetization of those things. So, you know, as Margot said earlier, you know, we can't try to monetize soil fertility or something to actually effectively incorporate it in our understanding of land and work, you know.
I was thinking of like the last few comments that were made, and I was looking at the diagram, you have the last one there, it says government, and then it says participatory budgeting. And, you know, they're actually trying to do this in Boston, they're trying to create a participatory budget, and they did it in Brazil, like on a big, like national scale, they created the participatory budget, and it was hailed as this great progressive thing. But if you look at what that involved in Brazil, the World Bank and the IMF decide what the budget is. And then all the workers and the different groups fight over what they're going to get budgeted, you know. And so long as we're still in that model, we've got central government, we've got these global financial institutions, and everybody says that's the pragmatic reality, you know. But then if you look, what I was saying before, you look at like, you know, indigenous communities in Argentina and Bolivia, who don't even feel like the progressive governments are addressing any of their issues, but they're just taking land and they're building what they need, you know? And so I feel like that's closer to where I see the possibility is not the government with the participatory budget, but us, we have things, we live somewhere, we have shelters, we do all these things in our daily lives, we care for children and we care for elders and whatever, and when we start going to each other directly and doing stuff is when we start to create something else.
So maybe these innovations that we need aren't actually innovations, maybe they're things that exist in these alternative ontologies, these things that already are happening. But we've really only justified kind of one system of power and knowledge. And so maybe they're there. We just haven't tapped into it.
I was thinking about the industries that require a lot of capital to get into, and how they themselves can be cooperatives. thinking of maybe like the pharmaceutical industry, or like biotech, or those are really like niche industries that require a lot of capital startups. So how can workers get the resources they need to start that sort of cooperative that focuses on those things that we do need medicine, we need innovation in these industries for society to be quote unquote better off, So I guess I was thinking about that, and then I was thinking about, I'm kind of ranting, globalization and how do we scale back, and does that help some communities more so than others? Because if we do scale back, like in other parts of the world, they might not have the resources that one other country does. So how can we share those resources across, like, transnationally, in a more holistic, in this type of model? So I was just thinking about that.
Well, globalization doesn't give resources to people that don't have resources.
Right.
It takes resources from people that do.
Well, just speaking in my own little niche of knowledge, you mentioned medicine, the whole way that we think about healthcare has been hijacked by the pharmaceutical industry. So what I would like to do at this conference next year is to have a workshop to help me envision what would it, just that niche, because that's my niche. It is, what would that system look like if we did it the way it made sense, and then figure out how, what are our steps to get there. So a whole lot of what is in the other pillars of the medical industrial complex that cost so much are just because of this hijack. Even that system would look really different if we did it in a solidarity kind of way. And I've got day-to-day experience of that, and it's really frustrating because it's impossible to fund that given in the current system.
So the way that the Bronx Cooperative Development Institution wants to kind of use these models is like as an organizing tool. I think that Jordan and Noah, you guys are right. Like, a lot of these are can be thought of like as transition things, and that they do exist within this. They essentially mediate better than the mediating institutions that we live to. And what's kind of still left to do is figure out okay, so if this is a transition, where are we going? What does it look like to have a society that really kind of encompasses all of the things that we value, all the things that are really important to us, and puts those things at the center, and there's a system of accountability and actually how it works. It's not just going to be like kumbaya, now we all love each other. So what I was gonna have you guys do so you think that you guys understand the model, yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay, so then let's maybe go into a vision space, because it seems like people want to do that. I think that might be useful too. I was gonna have you guys kind of think about some of the different institutions that are really popular right now, like community land trusts and worker cooperatives, and really try to parse out kind of what Stacy was doing when you thought about housing in our current institution. How does it work? Our current model. How does it work? How does economic democracy reorient those relationships? How do community land trusts make it different? But it might be more helpful to think about what could it look like? What could it look like if there was a housing or land system that placed things that are really important to us at the center, and then what would some kind of institution around it be? It's really big, but I think that you guys can do it. Yeah, does that make sense?
Wait, so are we gonna do the thing you were gonna have us do, or something different?
I was thinking something different,
Okay.
unless you wanna do what I was gonna have you do.
My brain is just so full of other stuff that I'm happy to follow you.
Okay, great. Yeah, too much like questions sometimes. So let's just like pair up. Great. And then you don't have to take what's on your actual flip chart. But if you guys want to stay in the realm that it's in. So, for example, with worker properties, you'd be thinking about work and how does work in a society where people have access to and control over capital and resources. What does that look like? And you guys would be looking at like finance. So, like, how do you grow or like scale or do you need to? And that's a question that you guys can try to address. And you guys are looking at government. What is a governance system? Perfect. And then you guys are looking at home and housing and land. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So not very long. Just like, take like 10 minutes. And then we'll just like talk about what you guys talked about.
So we're trying to capture our vision of what land and look like.
Yeah, I
Big.
think so.
So this is our vision
Yeah.
I'm gonna need
for
a
what
bigger
we work.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, I put
Yes.
in there because I guess my question is like, what,
I mean, just
I
one
think,
I'm gonna stay-
I don't know, I mean, the work that I'm doing now is about trying to, actually,
That's
it's
work.
not appropriate, yeah, like, it's okay.
So it's work.
Work I'm doing now is trying to figure out what do people know, and how do people understand things, how do they, like, make their opinions on, and I work on water quality issues, so, how do they, decide they understand what water quality is, and how do they, decide that they understand something, and, how do we use the knowledge that people really have, and how we use that to make effective policy.
that
So,
takes it outside of
and, in some radical way, my idea is just that, like, science is and that, like, those forms of knowledge are, like, they're elevated and they're not actually, right, they're real, but not, they're just not the only way. So, exactly, yeah. And so, that's my question is, where did experience with governance come from, if not from there?
So maybe we could.
So even if you need to go and buy some fun,
Yeah.
Being able to envision
So yeah.
what they
So,
did, what
the
really
problem
does
is how
push them,
do you address it?
and then tie it in with all other stuff like food and
Because you can stop if you don't
work
sell it.
and all
It's
that
not
stuff,
It was a highly regulated
which
market.
could change
So
what
you
kind of
couldn't
Then
just
you've got the
sell
issue
it
like
by
how,
resident,
how you can have a doctor.
You had to, you could either trade it for a comparable rate, so you could do things like, if you had too much house, you could trade that for a smaller house and a car.
but,
Or,
so they had to take care of a chunk of it.
And there was a lot of financial transactions like that going
So
on,
that's
and you could
fine,
also
isn't it?
have advantage of, like, your house for staying in a family.
Get this
But
guy.
Where are you
then,
gonna get money from?
I got skills and help you with that,
if you
so.
wanted to do a more
So
open
I think
transaction,
some kind of
there was like
Are
a
you
place
gonna
where
see
you go
one?
together about
like
what it
somebody
is that
would, there was like a broker
do
that would
you
connect
need?
you to like a swap. And it
we
wasn't a
have
direct
to
swap, it was
deliver
like
and
a
because maybe
it
some of it.
was very
And
Maybe
then
if you cut this
it's funded through some kind of community
Okay, so,
investment in
yeah,
every other working
so
cooperative.
I think that, like, what we're saying is that the governance needs to, like,
You know, your work.
Under the
kind of get out of this abstract place, and actually deals with,
What we need
like,
to know around is
physical realities.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's like it would be like a network, like a
kind of
co-op
like,
network.
I mean, to me, the idea of budgeting has everything to do with
Like an
capital.
alliance. Kind of like that's kind of what Sage is hoping to be.
Maybe
Is like
that's
a
like not an
network.
effective currency anymore, not in this new,
Right now, to get this mediator of
Is
the idea
stewardship
of working with
anything
a
different?
budget or some abstract thing,
thing.
doesn't really make sense
So
to
there's
me.
even
Physical realities.
you know,
I guess it's community.
And
We practice, I guess.
we have a group of
Priorities.
we call them solidarity
Working with the organization that work better.
Financial
and then we
aspects.
we are part of
And
the
then there's
Thanks for
and then we have national organisations.
I just like to say, based on what you were saying, so like a network of co-ops and other like solidarity groups that are able to help to bolster each other up, but also a database of some kind, like or like some sort of like a
Maybe
subcontract,
thinking about things as
like a
like
general
functional
contracting kind of thing, where
yes.
as a general contractor,
Maybe.
you, like a job site, you would, if you're working with a customer that has a wide array of different things that they need done, you can act as, you know, bringing in other people
So I
from
think
other
that
areas. So I feel like something like that was
one of the-
available where you could have like a network of like all the different trades.
So this kind of
that
like
are all part of this
replaces
network,
our-
so people didn't have to go hunting through yellow pages to find the
kind of the
social
thing that
media
we're
stuff.
trying to
So
manage.
there's one database for it.
Maybe the question is, how do we structure something to manage this new, or do we need to structure something? Is there another way to communicate everybody's needs and everybody's resources?
So yeah, maybe that's
And to cultivate co-op.
So we manage to
I guess this is very real to me right now. You know, if somebody is taking better care of this building, we would have to invest on
But
this.
yeah, but it's not like, so it's like.
It's not really
Like,
regional.
calling our resources.
Or it may be regional, but it's not like.
and now yes it's there.
So I was thinking something like, something that's like if a Worcester person wanted to like
I feel like repair and
name it,
maintenance
like
is like.
get their like porch fixed or like
So,
have
one of my questions that I'm thinking about like resource
you know
flow
that
is that things like water and like nutrients and agriculture and those things happen, they move and they're not stationary and they aren't local most of the time. So how do we reconcile local autonomy with like larger, you know, system impacts, larger ecological and community systems? Because, you know,
So in some ways it's.
you know, the impact that one person has on a watershed affects everybody else.
People and
Are locally autonomous, how do we ensure that the localities?
Thinking about like rebuilding things, so we need housing, so
Yeah.
the housing stock is not
Yeah.
good. How do
Yes, how do we like create maybe communication between the localities?
And to
And
me,
then
it's
you
like,
can-
what I was
you
thinking
can-
of, and I know that is like almost a Cuban kind of system. Like, there's like, you know, in the same way that we have road crews that go out and fix roads, we have like house
Bill.
crews that go out and fix your houses. And those, and it's not even, like, people don't pay at all for their own organizations, you know, that like, we consider it part of the public infrastructure, and we go out and fix the ones that most need fixing first, and we like prioritize stuff on the basis of what's about to fall down, and like, you know, almost like a public utility would, just not repairing their infrastructure. What would it look like to
This is
consider
resonating with like systems knowledge, like
You
or
still
ideas that are
operate within
maintain that
Yeah.
really well right now, so
So
probably
you
say that
abstract
you know, a conception of government and people and economies as
How do you
I don't know,
like,
system, an interconnected
It's an interesting way to start in a different place.
yeah, you have to count.
And that's also where you're gonna get, you're gonna get slammed.
So,
So you gotta also.
But again, I guess I sort of go back
You
to
can protect
values,
each other.
like it seems like
We have a social
Because
food,
it's
shelter,
true, I mean,
for
it's not gonna happen through the
that's a
state, whether,
value. So how do we do that? Clearly, the private
and there's a reason why I always just
system
want to
that we
keep it
have
on.
now is
I like that, yeah.
that value.
Definitely one level.
further away from it. But you,
Yeah,
you
and-
can't get away
This is
from it.
hard.
There's no way
Yeah.
that we can get away with
I think that
from that model.
You know, I think.
on the end of worker
So take
cooperative
like 2 more minutes to like write down some more ideas, and also write down like key questions that you have. Like if you could answer this question, like you would solve the problem of the universe.
How do you get?
I think that
economic
it's
means.
What?
If you're gonna
said
make
this
this
a minute ago,
scale,
but I
how
also
are you
think
gonna incorporate those who
Let everything get
aren't
worse and
able
worse
to
and worse.
investigating
I think that's
existing systems that are alternative is like so controversial.
of vision and hope with.
You tend to find once
I
you
guess
operate
I'm
that it
kind of
doesn't cost you any more
People
than
don't know
the
space on their own.
Yeah, I'm at
Yeah.
So it's really tough to find
Or
people
else it kills them.
that
It
are
does.
not.
I think agriculture
And the objective is to withdraw from that
Agriculture and other
and go
resources.
part-time and not take that dedicated to the electric.
Yeah, and one question
Spend the other
would be,
20 hours a week
how
as
would
spent at work.
we form
Or are we talking about groups that are
And it's about
in the areas that are
So
really
like,
concerned? How do we form
because if you don't
reputable entities that are able to take on this work with limited, like, you know, lag time?
I mean, even I think
You know, weird integration.
like their religious societies have that function.
Things that regulate
you know,
you.
Yeah.
Like, I have a license,
Monasteries.
you know, there's certain things, I mean, I could create a model where,
I don't know anything
where I
about
got
it.
free license.
They can cooperative that, or we have something called building society.
That
Like, if-
made me.
Where you put the money and you are a shareholder.
Yeah.
So why not?
A licensure requirement.
Yeah, so I know that it's like that, but I know that all the neighbors don't want that. In other words, where you'll get
Even if I didn't have
like mine, it's
So,
so,
and I
but
thought-
if like, if it's just say we didn't come
The
back
one
with
thing around that is,
the last
I
one,
wanna be
just
able.
sea level having no loss in that burning water, and you only have to say that helps. So remember President Obama, and that just state ones.
Yes.
Okay, so they have a capital, which is your, which is the money of the people.
So to
So
me,
what,
it's, right,
so you must
I guess
have
that's,
things
to
like that,
me,
like,
it's,
you have to have a license to do
me, it's like-
certain things.
Yeah, there are barriers to entry for most industries, some are bigger than others, but yeah, contracting, there are a lot of barriers to entry. You need to have $1 million insurance policy,
Yeah.
like all the licensing.
30 seconds to finish up your final.
But that's really interesting that you're
It's how to actually get out.
Yeah.
Fresh out of college,
How to get away from needing money and is the objective. How you do that.
Do you have issues like that?
Globally.
Right?
Yeah. And then I think that the other place to
Which
look
of
is
them
in
wants to
like,
start with their
ecological
report back on what they talked about?
At least we have a starting point.
Would you like to start?
Sure.
Yeah, you wanna start?
We talked about how to create a system that could gain access to money without using credit unions or banks. Which is not. Firstly, we have to ask the question: do we need money, and what do we need the money for? Because maybe there are other ways of going about it completely differently than getting access to money as the starting point. Maybe that should not be the starting point.
Did you guys talk about what should be the starting point?
We're asking questions, we're not coming up with solutions. We had an example from Italy of a group that I am a member of in Italy, and a dairy farmer produces milk and cheese that we're part of a little network, and we're part of a network of networks, solidarity food-based buying economy. And one of our providers went bankrupt. He had a farm, and he converted to organic about 5 years before to provide us with organic cheese and milk. He went bankrupt because he couldn't get money off the banks. So we had an email campaign between our members, and we raised €100,000 in 45 days. And we gave him the money with no contract. He bailed himself out of bankruptcy, And we agreed to buy his produce for the next 5 years. So he produces all this cheese and milk. He charges us probably 10% more than he charged us before. So we pay him 10% more for his cheese and milk. And with his 10% extra, he pays us back our money. So they did the same with a shoemaker. He produced handmade shoes. And I'm not sure whether he went bankrupt or he just retired. And he had his shoemaking machinery. And so we made an agreement with him. He sends us a piece of cardboard. We draw around our shoes. We choose one of 3 styles or 5 styles, and he makes our shoe. So we managed to get. I was saying we didn't get away from the capitalist funding model, but we abstracted it one move away. You know, if we could have scaled it up, if we can scale up and we can give the guy down the road $100,000 and agree to buy all of his cheese or whatever it is he or she produces for the next 5 years, we can avoid these things. We just need, everybody has to have a bit of money. If we give $100 each, enough $100 here and there, and we will be able to create our own system.
Okay, let's move on, and then we'll do a discussion then. I was trying to decide whether or not we'll respond to each one, but we'll run out of time if we do that. So let's hear from everyone, and then we'll discuss. Someone else. Back to left or right?
Well, I asked my threesome to indulge me in thinking about this in relation to my own niche. So we started there and talked about this is about worker cooperatives, that in healthcare you would need a hybrid between a worker and consumer cooperative, so that people you would be responding to the needs that people had, and that the people who control, people who need it would need the service would control it, as well as the people who do the work. And that if you had the working conditions that everybody else was, the working and living conditions that everybody were living under and working under were inside a solidarity economy, that it would be a whole lot less complicated, because a lot of the problems people have would be different and mitigated. And then so that kind of gave rise to the need for a network of cooperatives, so that the funding for that cooperative would come from, say, his cooperative that is doing landscaping would need to put aside money so that it would cover the health care that they need, and that would would feed into the worker consumer cooperative around healthcare, and that there was a real need for a database among all these different kinds of cooperatives as to who could provide what to supplement what each group was providing. That some of what we do are already part of the solidarity economy, but that the big issue is around scaling up. And one that's going to happen when you scale up is that you are going to run up against demand. So you're going to have to build some kind of resiliency and protection, so that when you get slammed, as you start actually taking a piece of the market, and become competitive with the existing institutions, you've got a way to protect yourselves and people. And so the roadmap to how you get there is a big challenge. Do we wait for things to collapse, or do we start building things now? And how do we get to the point where we're competitive, and then how do we protect ourselves when we attract enough attention to get resisted?
No, she's very thorough. That's really good. You're good.
You're good. You took the notes. Those were good.
Yeah.
So our topic was community land trusts, and we had a very, Mickey and I have been friends for a long time and have been talking about housing for a long time, so we had a kind of a very theoretical but also personal discussion about housing and what are our rights around housing and land and shelter. And so we came up with very little. We jotted down some things about thoughts about the way that we know housing is done differently in other places. The experience that I have traveling to Cuba and learning about how, well, at least about 15 years ago, how they were doing housing then, and how people were allowed or not allowed to buy or sell housing. And then about the 99-year lease model that's used in a lot of community land trusts, which I guess is also used by the state of Israel, which I didn't know about. And then also thinking a lot about renovation and maintenance, since we both recently became homeowners, and that is a thing that we talk about a lot. So we talked about values around land and shelter, and what does it look like if we start from scratch and say, how do we, like, I don't think that we know that there's a housing model that we can look at to say, like, that's the way that we want to go. But we can make some value statements like everyone has the right to quality shelter. And then there's some value statements that we're not sure about making, like, does everyone have the right to access land, and for what? So for agriculture, recreation, to use natural resources for industry, business, commerce, like, what kind of rights should we really have to land? Assuming that that it shouldn't be doled out based on, you know, the birth lottery and how much you were born with or how much access you were born with. So those are all just questions, not answers, and I think that if we had had another minute or two to talk, we probably would have said, we talked a lot about, you know, clearly there's a lot of virtues to holding land in trust, and we all believe in that, but it's like, are we willing to go so far as to say all land should be held in trust, and what happens then? And as someone who used to work in the remodeling industry, I was always grappling with how can we actually help people maintain their buildings. I think of buildings as a public good, you know, or as part of the public infrastructure. We didn't build the buildings; they were here before we were born. You know, long dead carpenters built them, and especially mine. And we owe something to them to maintain it and to protect their work, and also to make sure that it's available for the people coming along before. So it's like after us. I mean, so it's not just for us and for our property values that we need to maintain buildings. It's bigger than that. So how do we consider the repair and maintenance of buildings? You know, would we be willing to go so far as to say that we should think of building maintenance and repair in the same way that we think of like roads and the electrical system and the transportation system is like a public good that we need to repair and maintain? I don't think either of those questions about should all land be held in trust and should housing be considered part of the public infrastructure, I'm not sure I'm willing to go as far as to say that yes to either of those things, but I think that they're intriguing questions.
That's great.
Oh. I feel like I've talked a lot already.
You guys are both excellent speakers.
Are you doing great?
Well, maybe we can each do a piece of it.
Sure.
So, well, we started off by talking about, we put, I think Jordan, you know, put a question mark after governance over this participatory budget idea, and I think our discussion was about how do we get away from some kind of centralized budget to much more direct kinds of resource sharing, and something that we see as something that really involves local communities that are land-based and that hold their resources in common, but at the same time recognizing that that we don't want that to create a situation where certain folks are well situated and have all the resources because of where they live, right? So we want to figure out how do we create then networks of local communities that know how to engage in a participatory way in decision making where everybody's voice is kind of heard, and that collective process involves